welcome to another episode of Frame and Reference. I'm your host, Kenny McMillan, and today we're talking with John Brawley, ACS, the DP of the new film Lakewood, with Naomi Watts. John was fantastic to talk to, just kind of up my alley in regards to the right balance of technical and artistic. So we had a really great chat. He's very generous with his knowledge and time. One thing at the head that I think maybe people will be interested in is he shot this film on the Blackmagic 12K. And, people kind of expect most films to be shot on ARRI or Red or Sony with the Venice these days. But, you don't see a lot of Blackmagic necessarily. Although we had Down with the King, I suppose that counts. But so he talks about that a little bit as well. So if you're a Blackmagic fan, you'll want to stay tuned for that. But that's all for the intro. As always, I will now be quiet until 2 seconds from now when I continue talking from the past. And anyway, enjoy this conversation with John Brawley, ACS. How did you get started in cinematography? Were you always like a visual guy, or growing up, were you kind of in the movies, or was it something you kind of came to later?
Yeah, I mean, from a very young age, I was very into photography. I love taking photos. I was always interested in lots of things. I had a little electronics kit, I had a chemistry kit, but photography was like the first kind of hobby as a kid or interest that I had where I didn't get bored, and I found there was always kind of new things to try or new approaches to have. And I also really liked the power that having a camera gave. I mean, I think that it was the first Gulf War was happening. There was all these kind of protests happening back in Australia. And I remember having this camera and being able, it sort of gave me, it was like a passport. It gave me permission to approach people. It gave me permission to photograph people. And also at the time I was doing a lot of live music photography. I mean, I was actually underage, but still somehow getting into a lot of these venues and photographing musicians as well. Then from there, actually, I started dabbling a bit with lighting and stuff. In making images was always something I was very into. And then when I left high school, I was going to start a degree that was a kind of a general media degree. In the end, you would have a teaching qualification that no one has ever heard of called a Bachelor of Education. Not that I want to be a teacher, but the first 3 years was essentially a media degree. And then while I was doing that degree, they had a filmmaking component, and I shot my first roll of 16mm film, and I was just hooked. I mean, it was reversal. So the film that went through the camera is what was projected. There was no editing. You just had a 100-foot roll, which is 3 minutes, and you had to shoot this little sequence with some rules and parameters. And I just loved it, seeing that image projected, sitting in a classroom, I think it was about 40 students, and watching it and feeling the audience be affected by it. That was addictive. So I really got into the idea of cinematography. And also, photography is a very solitary endeavor. Often you're by yourself, or you're doing it all by yourself. And I really like the fact that film or television, narrative drama, even event stuff, everything, it all involves collaboration with a lot of people. So I think I really got into that. So yeah, that was it. I think I didn't even complete that degree. I was about 18 months into my degree, and I was like, I got offered a job as a best boy on a TV show. And I thought, well, why would I go to college, to university, to study what I'm already getting a job? I'm going to go and do that. So that's what I did. I left and started my career that way. And then weirdly, 12 years later, I actually went back to school, and I went and did my master's without having even done an undergraduate degree. I went back and did my master's at AFTRS, which is the premier sort of Australian film school. So I sort of did it all backwards.
Yeah, that's fucking cool. Yeah, I went to this thing called New York Film Academy for a summer program, like 6 weeks.
Yeah,
between high school.
We've got a campus, I think, a couple of campuses in Australia too now. So,
oh, word, yeah. This one was the Universal Studios one, so that was awesome. As like an 18-year-old, being on the Universal Studios backlot, shooting 16mm. You have free reign. It was incredible. But then I went to Arizona State. I feel like I've brought this up every interview, and learned almost nothing. Apparently the film school's a lot better now, but when we started it, the program had just started. So, in 6 weeks at New York Film Academy, I learned more about collaboration and lighting and just all of it than I did at the 4 years at ASU. But
Yeah, I think it's a mixed bag with film school, and whenever people ask me about it, I always think the best thing about it is usually the peers that you have, the other people that
Yes.
you have to learn to work with, the friendships that you'll make for life, potentially people that you're going to have an ongoing working relationship with, and that's where you meet
12
them.
years later, I'm still friends with all those people
Yeah, and I bet you still make films and do stuff with them, and that becomes your career, which
every day.
important part of it. And you've got that history of a relationship. That's what's great about it.
Well, and the nice thing for me too was the one note about film school that just for anyone listening is like if you're going to go to film school, you have to make it work. No, that don't rely on the professors to teach you anything. Use that time to like get some people together, like you were saying, and like start making things and learn on your off time, and
Yeah.
don't sort of get distracted by how fun
I
college
think
is.
I think it's practice. I mean, when I ended up going back and doing my masters, we had a great course because it was very practical. We were literally making, there were exercises, but you're kind of making a film every week.
Yeah.
And just the practice of doing that, of making mistakes. And when you're in an academic environment too, I think you think differently to when you're being paid to do something. You don't take the same kind of risks. So
Yeah.
I really did actually enjoy it. I didn't think I would enjoy it, but I actually really did enjoy that. And as one of the lecturers there said to me, people don't just get in a plane and fly a plane. You go and do 100 hours in a simulator, and then you do some tandem flying with an instructor sitting next to you. And it's only after you do 1,000 hours or 500 hours or whatever that you're allowed to fly the plane by yourself. And it's filmmaking is a little bit like that. I think you've got to learn the craft. You've got to log some hours essentially on set just to understand how it works. I mean, of course, there's going to be people that are naturally gifted that can just do it straight away, but frankly, that's like 0.001%. Most of us have to learn that stuff as we go. And I think the more you practice in a way, the better. And I think film school can be great for that and those kind of relationships as well. But it's only as good as what you invest in it yourself.
Yeah. And for us, like, being at Arizona State, it was, I don't know if you know
Mm.
the type of school it is, but it's known as one of the premier party schools in America. So it was easy to get distracted.
Learn how to do some things, just maybe not the filmmaking part.
You know what? My girlfriend marvels at how I'm able to make friends with anybody within seconds, and that is something that actually was very valuable. But even so, one thing that helped move into Los Angeles was me and all my friends who came from the film school all moved here.
Mm-hmm.
So there's the hardest thing in the world in LA is just to meet people and make friends, especially in a working environment in the creative space. And it's just, we all kind of spread off and did our own thing. And then we'll come back to meet up. Yesterday I was hanging out with 4 or 5 of them, and we were just talking about, one of them is a podcast producer who works at Sony, and other one's, an AD on big commercials and stuff. And so we're always just kind of like sharing the sort of wealth there. Cause it's, that this person isn't full of shit. Mm. You're like, I've seen you at your worst, like we're this is chill. Yeah. The one thing I did want to say though, that you mentioned that I thought was actually kind of stuck with me is I also love photography. Mm-hmm. And I like that. I didn't realize it until you said it, but I do like the fact that if I'm in a certain mood, I can be collaborative and make films. And if I'm in a different mood, or I need to, maybe study or think or kind of reevaluate how I'm looking at light or whatever, kick it over to photography, same muscle.
Yeah. It does keep you in practice, and that's what I really enjoyed, was the process of composition, of choosing what to point the camera at. I love it. I mean, we could have this discussion, but as technology changes, iPhones are shooting ProRes and so on, and there's always a kind of fear about technology changing your job or changing the business, and it's usually people that are invested in a lot of equipment, and I understand it, but it's never going to be able to replace you making those subjective choices about where to point a camera, what to put a frame around, how to expose that, all of those choices that go into making that image. And photography is a great way to exercise that muscle without all the other infrastructure of cinematography that goes with that, with it being a huge crew and a bunch of people. And so on. So yeah, I mean, it's always a really great exercise. And the funny thing is when I started out, I was in started off. It was mostly film, like digital was sort of coming in, but I trained in my early days of cinematography on film, and I had this ritual or routine of taking photographs still. Firstly with Polaroids, right? So you would take a Polaroid of the image to check your lighting ratios and just kind of look at how things were looking on film. And then that became the early digital cameras. But so we're still shooting on motion picture film, but you take a digital still, and you could sort of get a preview of things. So for me, even now, I still take a lot of photos as part of my kind of lighting process. So before I roll on the first take, I'll usually go in, take some photos. And it's a great kind of ritual or practice to continue, and it's always stayed with me. And of course, I really enjoy photography when I'm not on set as well. But it still gives me a lot of pleasure, and it still kind of exercises that muscle. And even too from a grading and post point of view. So I'll often take some photos when I'm testing. And right now I'm in pre-production for a new series. I'm taking photos in some of our proposed sets and locations. I'm playing around with grades and starting to get an idea of how things can look and how things might work. And it's a great process for that, and it's very, very accessible and very simple way to keep things kind of fresh in your head.
Yeah. Are you still using meters a lot, or are you kind of just sticking to the monitor, maybe taking some test photos and that kind of thing?
I mean, I used to do that, have that process. So the digital camera became a light meter for me when I was shooting on film. But these days, with the exposure tools in the cameras now are so good. I mean, I might take a reading. If I take a reading, it's more about measuring the ratio of a key to fill. It's not really what do I set my camera at, that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. Better determined, I think, with other tools. I love using false color a lot. But to trust that, because the other problem that you have generally on set is a lot of monitors lie to you, and especially if you're trying to monitor a HDR image, a lot of them have a HDR badge. It just means that they're really bright. They're not a particularly good monitor usually for critically assessing anything on set, especially because you're moving them around and then the sun comes out and it's impossible. So, I trust the false colors because that kind of works no matter what. Like any viewing conditions, you can kind of see how it is. And I think that's one of the great things actually I've taken from shooting on film is that discipline of knowing that if you middle your exposure, if you've done your work in prep and you know the camera and you know the range that you can get away with, you don't have to sweat the images on set and try and adjust and grade. You know that you can fix it or address those issues later on often, or what you need to adjust in terms of lighting on set. So I actually often treat it just like film. I don't often use a lot of grading time on set. I don't often use actually a DOT. I'll just kind of treat it like film. I do all my work in pre. I do a bunch of different sequences of tests, get to a look that I really like that is for the dailies. That's kind of 80% of the final grade, depending on what the situation is. And then we apply that to the dailies, and maybe I'll do some little adjustments here and there as we go. But once you're up and running, I would rather shoot it on set, take the card out of the camera, and it's like a roll of film. You send it to the lab, and that happens off set. And if the dailies colorist has any issues, or if editorial are worried about something, you can go and address it. But I prefer that routine because you're just spending a lot more time where you should, which is with the director, with the cast, doing another setup rather than futzing around inside this tent trying to create a shot where it's irrelevant anyway, because you don't have the context of an edit, you don't have the best monitoring setup, and you're not sitting with your final colorist. So it doesn't make a lot of sense to me in that kind of workflow sense to mess around with it much on set.
Yeah, so I'm kind of the same way where I'll just meter the light to kind of like figure out, and also it's just nice because you can get an idea of what you're doing before without having to set up the camera and like look and then run back and forth.
Yeah. When you first get there, if you've got the lights out and the camera's not out yet, you can roughly see what's going on and go from there. And it's good for those kind of situations too.
Yeah, the tool that I've really I recently got, maybe like a year ago, 8 months ago, was the C800, the Sekonic color meter. Mm-hmm. And I've just been, I am the biggest nerd on the planet, man. I have been metering every possible. I wrote an article where I metered every light bulb that I could buy at Rouse just to see, could you light with these? And the answer is not really. But also LED panels, right? Like just LED lighting in general are so variable. And
I'm not a fan of most LED panels. I mean, I own the same light meter, and you only have to start. I mean, you can photograph them, and in them and by themselves, they can look fine. It's only when you compare them to other light sources that you start going, oh, there's some shortcomings. And the meter does tell you that as well once you learn how to read it. It sounds like you invested the time there. And I'm the same. I spend a lot of time in pre-metering different lights. I'll check all of, especially the prac lights. I work with the production design department because, of course, most lights these days come with LED bulbs, usually standard. So you're usually either trying to change them out for LEDs that you can accept, that are okay, or, ultimately put in some old-fashioned tungsten bulbs there as well.
Well, that's the problem with living in Los Angeles. Is in California, you're not allowed to buy regular tungsten. The one you can get that I found is, I know it's ridiculous, but you have to, like, I get it. We got to save the environment, but the only one you can get is the oven bulb, because the oven bulb can't be plastic. So you can buy oven bulbs, but
nice.
I'll tell you,
I'd be making a panel of get 48 oven bulb. I want to see that light. You can build it.
The Deacon's ring, but it's just a box of oven bulbs. Yeah. I'll tell you, I haven't told anyone this, but I'm actually in the middle to tail end of launching a website / app, because my buddy is smart like that. I just wanted to make a web page where ProVideo Coalition that releases this podcast is part of a company, Moviola, and then they own Film Tools. I went over to Film Tools and just metered every single LED panel they had with the thing. I'm gonna kick out all those, or I already did kick out all of those graphs that you can save with the chart, and the website is going to be where people can compare lights, various lights with that information. Right. And make more informed decisions on whether or not they're purchasing or renting. And it's shocking, dude. Like, the sky panels are not that good.
I know. I mean, I hate to say it publicly, but yeah, I mean, I would never use sky panels for any kind of key work on someone's face, because once you compare them even to other LEDs, but to other lights types, like tungsten, for example, is always beautiful on skin tones. They're great for other things, but they're not very nice as a key on a person's face.
It's the spectral output is surprisingly bad. And then you've got like newcomers like Nanlite. And those are actually quite, I mean, some of them are just like they don't have bicolor variability or anything, but some of those are really, TLCI is really high, TM30 is like dead, super circle. It's just super surprising how the big dogs are not like Kino. Actually, Kino has some really good lights too. Their LED
Kino very underrated, but I think they're very late to the party. I've used a lot of their stuff. I actually really like the Roscoe DMG. They have very good colors as well. They're probably the best, actually. I mean, I haven't tried any of the new stuff, but as of like a year ago when I was trying them out, the DMGs were very, very good, and the Kinos were also very good. Sky panel was like, but you got to remember that it's generational too. I mean, the sky panels are a few years old now, so they're like, it changes so quickly with updates of everything. I think the new DMG stuff now has 6 color LEDs in there, so they're adding and tweaking things all the time as well.
Yeah, the one you're 100% right. The one thing that I think people need to sort of check themselves on is when they're like, oh, I don't need to gel anymore because I just dial it in on the thing. And it's like, but that changes the look of, if you're going to use it as a key light, even as a environment light or something, it really does affect the look of any color if you're not doing white light through a gel.
The ultimate test too is actually a poor color, sodium. Like if you try and, I've never met an LED light yet that can replicate how awful a sodium light is.
Right.
Sometimes you need to match that color because you're shooting in an environment where those colors exist. If you go to Home Depot and buy some of those lights, they're $20 or whatever. I don't know if you ever metered them or put them into your app, but I recommend that you do this because a lot of the LED lights will have a preset for it. It'll never look like it. I mean, nothing looks like as terrible as a true sodium. There's a kind of strange combination of yellow and green that seems to be unreplicatable in any light. And also a lot of the gels, there's some pretty cool gels, like Urban Vapor is very nice color, but it's not what sodium is. It's a kind of theatrical interpretation of sodium. But if you're trying to match that color on set, on location with someone who's in foreground and you've got sodium in the background, it's actually quite hard to do. So the last few shows, I've been telling the gaffer, listen, you need to go and buy half a dozen of these sodium lights, and we're going to use them, and I have used them like as the key, because there's nothing that kind of matches that color. I find it's just unique, and also the way the camera sees that color too, of course, is another complication in all of this, which the meter tells you a lot, but then there's this extra layer of difficulty as well.
Yeah, I was literally a half hour ago talking to Kramer Morgenthau about his work on The Many Saints of Newark. Mm-hmm. And we were talking about the outdoor scenes in that film because I got to see a screener. And he said they replaced all the streetlights with Cobra heads, but then he put par cans there. And I was like, why didn't you go with the vapor? And he's like, yeah, the vapor looks like the way we remember it. But in my head, like old black and white films from the 60s, 70s, the streetlights were white.
Yeah.
And I was like, that checks out.
Well, I mean, now a lot of the public lighting is going to LEDs anyway. So even sodium is not what is used anymore. Right now, it's this kind of weird, anemic, horrible looking white, but sort of not very nice looking light. So, I think 10 or 15 years from now, it's going to be quaint using a sodium light because nobody will be kind of as used to that anymore because it'll be more likely to be LED based.
Yeah, I really wish they would. Like LA is absolutely full of those bright 6500K LEDs to the point where you drive around at night and you forget that your car's headlights aren't on because it's just so bright everywhere.
Yeah.
But it's like impossible to sleep now. And it's just ugly. And apparently like the light pollution's gotten nuts, but why won't they just do tungsten colored? Why do they have to be, I guess efficiency maybe or something, but
yeah. I don't know. Maybe they're taking a theatrical leap. There's some lighting designer there in the public work cupboards.
It'd be a lot easier for all the filmmakers if you just shot at 6500. So go ahead and just the whole city. Going back to the idea of photography, are you do you have like a photo camera that you're really into? Or are you still shooting film?
I do a lot. I'm just going to pull out what's here in front of me. I've got this little point and shoot film camera.
Oh, lovely. Is that a Leica?
It is, yeah. It's a Lumia. So I've got this guy every different day of the week. And my main camera of choice is probably one of these guys, one of the M Leicas.
Nice.
I love doing. I mean, every day I'll take a different camera to work. But for some reason, I still keep on returning to the rangefinders. I think just because they're discreet, I operate a shot and still have it on my shoulder, and it's not going to get in the way. So, and it's funny too, actually. There's a different kind of relationship that seems to happen with the subject I find when you use a rangefinder. I don't know if you've done much rangefinder versus a SLR or DSLR. When you have this big camera in front of your face, it changes things with a rangefinder, I think, because you tend to, let me grab this here. Because, the viewfinder's here, your face isn't covered up when you take the picture and the shutter doesn't black out either. So you also see the moment that gets photographed. I think it's different. There's just a different energy and a different chemistry, and it's literally reflected in the photos that you take. So I've become more and more aware of process, and how much process on set, and this affects the cinematography as well, the way that you approach, the way that you do the job. It's not just the job, it's the way you work on set and the kind of environment that you create. Same with photography. I think of this kind of rangefinder photography as kind of like the photographic equivalent of slow food. It sort of forces you to slow down, take a moment. You have to focus it. You have to expose it. You have to take a picture, and it kind of just changes the dynamic of how you work, and also changes the relationship you have with the subject. So it sort of came, I've tried lots and lots of different cameras, and I keep on returning to rangefinders because I find I get the most satisfaction from those images. And I really think it's not the technicality of the cameras. I mean, it's the process that it imposes on you in terms of craft. And I think with cinematography, it's the same. Your job as a DP, in a way, once you get to a certain level, like 10 cinematographers are going to do a great job on a movie, it becomes then, what are the interpersonal relationships? How do you conduct yourself on set? What are the kinds of conversations you have behind the monitors with the director and with your crew? Those are the things that actually make the movie. I think you get to a certain point from a technical, competency, from an image making point of view, everyone's kind of on an equal footing in that regard. Creatively, it actually becomes about the logistics and the interpersonal relationships and the process that you establish on set. One of the things I like to do for every new show that I do is try and come up with a manifesto or an idea of some rules. And the rules can also not so much be about lighting or image making, although obviously it's related, but it's often about process. I really love, for example, starting with close-ups before you do the wide shot, which is like never ever what the textbooks say you're supposed to do. You're supposed to shoot the wide shots, establish the lighting, let the actors rehearse and get on their game and work out what they're doing, and then you go in and do close-ups. I'm like, let's go the other way. Let's start with the drama first. Let's go into the close-ups, which are the shots you're going to use, because it breaks my heart. A lot of time actors, they can't help themselves. They'll come out from take one and they're crying and whatever, they're emoting and they're acting, and by the time you get to take six, it's they're spent. So I've found over the years, like it's a really good idea to start with close-ups. Not always, but it's often a really interesting way to go, and that's a process, right? That's just the sequence of the way you do things. Don't tell anyone, but I really quite like cross shooting, which again cinematographers are meant to hate. It's meant to be harder to light, but I love enabling actors to be able to overlap each other with their dialogue. I think that's really important, especially I've tended to do a lot of comedy over the years, and for comic performance, especially too, because a lot of times when you're doing comedy, by the time they've done 3 or 4 takes, it starts to wear out. You don't want them to rehearse or even run the lines in the blocking, because you hear it the first time, it's always the funniest, and you're trying to preserve that. And so by cross shooting, doing close-ups first, for example, with comic work, you can try and make something happen there, and the actors usually get into that routine as well. They know that they're going to come out of the gate really hard. Not all actors are great at it, but a lot of some prefer to go later, and you have a conversation about it and you try and structure it. But I just, in terms of process, I've realized that it's actually really important the way that we approach the job in terms of those workflow kind of things, where you're literally talking about the sequence of shots and the order that you shoot things, and that has a huge influence.
Yeah, the process thing, like even drawing an analogy with photography again, is like, so my favorite, like, carried around everywhere camera is the Fujifilm, the X-T3.
Mm-hmm.
Love that camera. They also have like the rangefinders, the X Pro and the X100. Yeah. And there's awesome. And I found, like you were saying with the rangefinder, people, they think those cameras are film. So I've noticed that there's this weird, because everything's so immediate now and everyone's under surveillance, which I could go into a big long thing about that. People get nervous when cameras are around, because like, oh, this is going to be on the internet this second. But when you've got film or a camera that looks like it's film, although that could be ethically dubious depending on what you're doing. But if you're shooting film, people relax.
Yeah.
And they just kind of like, like at a party or something, you can be snapping photos and people are more like, unless like, get the fuck away from me,
Well, that's what I was saying. I mean, literally the mechanics of what you've got in front of your face is affecting, and it's reflecting back at you with the subject, because really all that photograph is a record of how they feel about you and what you're doing in that moment, right? So you can make them uncomfortable or you can make them more comfortable. And I always find those, as I say, those kind of rangefinder cameras are just less either threatening or less intimidating, or people just have a different kind of reaction to it. They just aren't going to be in the same way. And I think too, because they usually don't have super telephoto lenses, it's not like with some paparazzi 100 miles away. You've got to be close. You've got to be at kind of talking conversational distance. And that's a different kind of thing as well. Like all of these things affect, what happens when you put a camera up to your face and they become aware that you're taking a photo, all of those kind of things. I mean, a lot of the time it's fun to, if you do 3 or 4 in a row, you get the first one where, if it's someone who you haven't photographed before, you get the first one where they're like suspicious, and then they have the fake smile. Oh, I'm supposed to smile now. And then they kind of don't know what to do, or they'll kind of keep on amping it up. So it's funny to sort of look at the sequence of emotions and those emotional beats. And then I find usually after a while, when you've been doing it, one thing I like to do as part of my ritual is when I'm on a show every week, I'll send out a bunch of photos at the end of the week as a way of saying, hey, remember what we did this week? I'll usually send it to the producers and the heads of department and some of the crew. And it's just like a little reminder of the scenes that you did and those moments. And of course, you start to become more comfortable once you see the photos, and you get this kind of feedback loop, I guess, where people start to become more relaxed because they know what the nature of those photos and images are too. So it's really interesting, again, to talk about that process and having a rhythm and having a routine, and people then know what to expect. And I think it's really important. I mean, that's what slating is half the time. It's like the acting equivalent of the 100-meter dash when they say on your marks, get set, go. It's that all of those kind of rituals are triggers or are moments. We've all seen actors drop into character when that happens because that's the sequence, that's the routine.
Yeah. Well, and those on-set photos are oftentimes super valuable for people trying to learn, like, if they know where that shot was taken, they can look at the lighting and go, oh, okay, I got it. But
Yeah.
also, like, I have Jeff Bridges' Wide Luck. No, was it the
Oh
Wide
yeah.
Looks? His
Mhm.
his coffee table book, and it's like fascinating, those moments in between, especially taken by either a department head such as yourself or an actor, like,
Yeah.
versus the on-set publicity photographer who's
Yeah, well,
always
they're there
like,
for different. There for different reasons, and I mean, some of them are great, but a lot of them time they're mostly focused on what is the poster image. What can I've got to get 120 images at the end of the day of the actor, and they're not that interested, and nor should they be of us behind the scenes and so on. So I usually find my photos are useless from a publicity point of view because they're usually actors are in their warming coats or they're not in character or it's a period show but there's a PA in the background, so I never care about any of that stuff. I'm not trying to make or do publicity images. It's a little bit more spontaneous, but yeah, I mean they're different kind of purposes or outcomes that they're looking for there.
yeah. It occurs to me that I've interviewed a couple Australian DPs, and it does seem to be that Australia is incredibly workmanlike when it comes to their artists. It's very
Mm-hmm.
much like just buckle down and do the thing, and maybe not a nonchalance, but like an ease. There's not a lot of stress with y'all, and I was wondering how maybe growing up in Australia changed you or shaped you as a DP or as an artist.
Well, it's hard to make generalizations because I, of course, haven't grown up in the US to compare it to either. But I feel like in the Australian filmmaking world, we have a lot less resources. So we're much more used to making things work without the proper equipment or without the proper resources. And there's a lot more of a like problem solving mentality. It's like, okay, we don't, I mean, the first time I worked with a Technocrane was in the US, I'm pretty sure. Like, they're there, but no one can afford to, rent a techno routinely. Like here, it's almost like it's just expected you're going to have a few days on every episode. Whereas I never really thought that I'd ever get to use one when I was working in Australia. So you just find other ways to do those kinds of shots. So I think there's always this kind of problem solving mentality. And honestly, the light is really different as well. So you're dealing with a different set of conditions, and the Australian light is really tricky and it's brutal. It's really harsh and hard, and so I think I find I have a much more simplified approach. And I think too the pace that we tend to work at is usually a little bit faster, or has been. I mean, nowadays it's different, but certainly when I first came over, I was used to a very fast pace. And it was quite a difference or a slowdown because I think everyone's used to a lot more equipment, a lot more hardware coming out, and so I'd kind of come up using less stuff and still trying to, you're obviously still going for a great result, but finding that simplification was usually the best way to get the best result in the least amount of time. So, I'm quite happy to, a lot of the time I rarely will bring lights out on a day exterior, whereas, on a big show, you've got all these 18Ks, you could do it if you needed to, but it's like, I never feel the need to, I always just do grip lighting and pull out some bouncer. And that's another big difference, by the way, too. I mean, grips only tend to do camera moves and camera related stuff. They don't tend to work in the same way the US grips do. So that's taken me a long time to get used to, because now I have to have two conversations about lighting, as opposed to in Australia, I'd have one conversation with the gaffer about what light and what was going to be in front of it and what the end result was going to be. And the grips at most would put a tower up, or they'd do some a very big negative if you had to build a tent. But otherwise, they don't have anything to do with lighting. It's all with the gaffer. So now I have two departments I've got to kind of manage. So in a way, it's good, like especially if you have a great team. But sometimes that relationship gets complicated by being it's like you're in this kind of strange threesome all of a sudden, as opposed to just being in a normal one-on-one kind of relationship. So it can work out, and sometimes it blows up as well.
Yeah. When dealing with that really harsh light, or even here or there, do you have kind of like maybe not a set lighting pattern because there's no such thing, but like the way that you approach diffusion and bounce and negative, especially now with more sensitive cameras and stuff? Because this is something that I've noticed a lot of DPs that all have different approaches to, like exterior um, sunlight, basically.
Yeah, I mean, I usually am trying to go a little bit for continuity. Obviously, you always want to obey the rules of physics, but I'm also not too beholden to it either. So, I'll usually, I don't know. I mean, it depends on the what the scene requires and what it looks for, who you've got in front, who needs a little bit more help versus who doesn't need a bit more help. That's going to affect the staging and the blocking. So usually you're trying to affect, you've done a location scout, you're trying to choose the time of day that you're there, you're trying to find the aspects that will work for that time of day with the cast that you want to put in that particular location. These are all kind of choices that you're making before you even get to the lighting to set yourself up to succeed if you can. And of course the actors get there, and then they want to do it some other way and over this way, and you're set up to go this way, which is another thing. But I think for day, I mean, honestly, most of the lighting I do now, I tend to be more, I think, I don't want to say naturalistic, but more truthful, and more genuine. I don't tend to do stuff that's as polished as I used to try and do when I was younger. I'm not making sort of Chanel commercials. And it's been interesting because some of the shows I've been on recently are very polished shows with very A-list actors who come with a huge set of expectations. And I've literally had to be like, are you sure you got the right guy here? Because, this is what I'm known for over here. And, but I think there's a way to kind of work between pictorialism, that kind of highly stylized work, and doing something that's a bit more authentically, naturalistically done and driven. Most of the time these days, I'm tending to light the space. I try and stage, whether that's outdoors or indoors, and I try and stage with the director to take advantage of what that space is, with what's going on lighting wise and what's going on with background and aspects. And then, if you need to help things, then you step in and adjust or modify and augment, but you're not fighting what the natural location is and what it wants to do. So that's kind of been my go-to, I guess. It's always fun to step outside of that and challenge yourself. And just to bring it back to process, think, okay, well, I'm in a routine and a pattern here. What can I do to shake that up? As I said, I love having a manifesto, and in a way that can be a great way to shake up your own rules. And I kind of got the idea from, if you've ever watched the Lars von Trier doco, The Five Obstructions, Lars von Trier, it's a great example of creative process. I don't know if you know the film, but he kind of challenges his old film school university lecturer to remake a short film 5 times over, and each time he remakes the film, he's going to give him a different set of, he calls them obstructions, but kind of rules. What I think the first set of obstructions, he says, okay, you have to make it in Cuba. He's a Danish guy, he's never left the country. You're going to make it in Cuba, and no shot can be longer than half a second, 12 frames, which is quick, because the film is all these like very long, languid single shots, and it seems impossible, and yet he finds this great solution. So I think, having those kind of self-imposed rules, the ridiculous ones even, forces you to kind of go, okay, what is the difference? What is the other way I can get around this and problem solve this? And, you can find great solutions if you throw away you can get into a routine and a kind of stagnation if you just do what worked last time. And if it worked well, then why wouldn't you change it? So you've got to, I think, it's an interesting part of the kind of creative process is to always examine those critically and think, how can I do this differently? What am I doing here as rote? And what do I need to kind of change up or alter here to see what's new? And you're of course always feeding in the new technology and some new LED light that's come out, and you're always kind of trying to smashing them in together to try and use all of those tools for some kind of creative outcome. So this is why I'm still not bored of cinematography. I haven't really. A lot of people are like, oh, you should go into directing. I'm like, yeah, I really like making images. It's actually really fun. It's something that's incredibly engaging to me.
Yeah, there's 2 things. One, I always try to, on any project, kind of sort of what you're saying is like, I always try, sounds dangerous, but I always just try to test something out.
Mm.
You know, like I'll pick one thing that wouldn't necessarily like ruin the project if it goes
Yeah.
wrong, and just
Yeah.
tries, whether it be a piece of gear or a new technique or something. I'm like, I'll just try it out.
Yeah.
And especially if you're doing gigs that are like, you know, for me, it could just be like an interview. You
Yeah.
know, I'm like, maybe I'll set up just some wacky, you know, establishing shot for this interview and just see if they
Mm.
like it. And then if they don't,
Yeah.
you're like, all right, whatever, I back up.
But you
But
got to, I think, yeah.
do it.
Yeah, you do. You have to test the waters and
Mm.
try try to kind of shake it up a bit and see what you're kind of just resting on your laurels and you know where you can kind of improve. And I think you know you don't always have to know the answers to everything. Like going into a show, it's like it's good to be scared and uncertain. And half the time, I think you know you make a risky choice and you're really terrified about it. And then at the end, it's like I could have done it twice as much, and you know I should have done it twice as much. I should have done more of it. Like you know, I always feel like I regret not doing more of some kind of risky choice that you take on doing something. So you know I think it's great to do that.
Yeah. Well, and then the notes, something you had said earlier reminded me of a an Adam Savage quote, the guy from MythBusters, where
Mm-hmm.
he said, you know, I think he was referring to time crunch, but you know, when things are getting tight, you know, it just hacks a bunch of branches off your decision tree,
Yeah,
and and that makes things a lot easier. People
yeah.
could get stressed out by having restrictions put on them, but it for me,
I
it's like,
think of it
oh,
as the
excellent.
I think of it as the Trivial Pursuit response. You know, 9 times out of 10, like you know the answer straight away when you have that Trivial Pursuit trivia question, and then it's only when you have time to think about it, you talk yourself out of the right answer. I think it's the same thing. Like most of the time, and it's you know honestly, when I first started my career, I aspired to shoot movies. I love cinema. I still love going to cinemas. I still love watching movies. But you know, as I started my career was when TV was really starting to take off, and you had movie actors and movie directors doing big television, starting to do these big shows just at the time that larger sensors were becoming available for digital cameras, and you know all of this was happening. And now I've made this career that's been more or less in television. But I still find that you know a new way of approaching those things, or different ways of approaching that kind of storytelling environment is kind of what's exciting and what's kind of what drives that interest. And now it's like you know TV is its own kind of form. People have kind of come to come to view it as its own medium, and I think streamers has had a lot to do with that as well because you don't have the ads interrupting the rhythm and the flow, and so the visual language of television. People have got bigger televisions. There's 4K televisions now, so it's all kind of doing its own thing. So yeah, it's very kind of interesting to me to kind of keep on examining those processes and seeing what it is that you can do to alter that.
Yeah. A little earlier, you had said that, you know, talking to maybe the higher ups, like, are you sure you have the right guy? Do you, or did you find that you were like making one thing and then you were trying to get to a different, maybe, part of your career, or you had like a goal in mind, and how did you navigate that? How did you
Yeah,
get
I
people
mean
to
it's
trust you
funny.
to do something you hadn't proved?
Yeah, when I mean, before I went and did my masters, you know, I was doing a lot of commercials and things, but there was always, I'd never get car ads. And there was a guy in the city that I was working in, and he got all the car ads. And there's another guy who got all the food ads, you know. And it's funny how people get this idea. It's like, well, you know, have they done cars? You know, do they know how to shoot a car? And I feel like, you know, as a cinematographer, you should be able to shoot anything, right? You should be able to put your mind to doing something in a way that's kind of interesting. But there's a lot of conservatism for all of the fact that we love to think that we're edgy and that we take chances. Most producers do not. They
Mm-hmm.
think they do, but they don't. And it's even more so. I mean, the funny thing is that actually as budgets go up, there's even more conservatism and more concern about whether you're going to be able to do the right job or you know be the right person. And actually, even though you've got more money, it actually comes with even more expectation. So you know it doesn't really change that coming from low budget. In fact, it's really nice and refreshing to sometimes be on a low budget film like I was just recently, where you don't have the same kind of degree of oversight because you've only got a couple of $1 million, and it's like more people aren't as kind of nervous about it. You know, I mean, honestly, most of the TV that I'm doing these days, it's 5 million plus per episode, and it's only sort of 45 minutes. So, going back to what your question was, yeah, I mean, originally I always thought I would kind of end up doing films, and that's where I wanted to go. And it gradually morphed into really loving doing television, and I love the form itself. I love the complexity of it. I love that it can be multi-seasons. I think of, a good movie is like reading some kind of in-depth Vanity Fair article, and it's glossy and it's great. And a TV series is like a novel. You've got all these chapters, you've got this extra complexity. I mean, they're different, enjoyable for different reasons. But I love the amount of story arc you can get, and it doesn't have to be this idea of a hero's journey of a single character. I think television can be multi-character and it can be more complex, and I think those are really interesting storytelling, modes to deal with. And I mean, I still obviously enjoy doing movies, but yeah, I've really come to love the form of television, and also what it takes to make that, in terms of the pace and the complexity, especially when you're looking after multiple units and multiple episodes and working with other cinematographers as well. And it becomes this kind of huge machine. I think again, that's where that process kind of thing comes into it as well.
Yeah. I feel like recently I was kind of bemoaning the fact that escapism was undervalued, that people were trying too hard to make things that like people want to feel. I can't remember, I can't attribute this quote to anyone, but someone was saying, I can't remember who it was, but someone was saying, everyone wants to talk about being not involved, but like being engrossed. What was the correct word? Basically, just being sucked into a film, like suspension of disbelief. And it's like you don't want that, because if you were there, if someone got murdered on screen, you would be horrified. Mm-hmm. You don't want to be completely immersed. We're not looking for immersion. We're looking for, not distraction, but like fantasy. You know you're watching a film. Yeah. And I think television is actually coming around and starting to be that, because people want to live in these fantastical places long, example being like Mandalorian, or going farther back, Sopranos or Breaking Bad or whatever. Even though those are terrifying shows, people want to live with those characters for much longer than film. And film
totally. And it's funny. I feel like having done shows, like I've done shows over a couple of seasons. I've come in on a later season of a show that's already established. It's like, most people have a favorite restaurant, and at their favorite restaurant, they usually have a favorite meal, and they go to the restaurant, and every now and then they'll try the other thing, but they like the lasagna at that restaurant. They want to go there every few weeks or every month or two, and they want to have the lasagna. I think good television is kind of the same. You have an expectation of what you're going to get and what you want. You don't mind it if they mess around with it a little bit. Maybe there's a different chef that week, they season it a bit, but you don't want to take it off the menu. You don't want to change things too much. And that's always something to be cognizant of when you're doing multi-seasons of a show, is like, you don't want to totally depart and go somewhere else, because people will be like, this restaurant's gone downhill. Like, since that guy left last year, the season's just terrible. So, I think fine dining is a great experience, and maybe that's that's the analogy of what feature film movies are. But when you're actually going somewhere regularly, it's okay to have the same thing. And in fact, it's almost a kind of a lesson to like be okay with doing. It's funny, like sometimes you're on a long-running show, and they're like, what directors will come in, it's like, which angle haven't you shot yet? And it's like, it's okay to go back to those angles. It's okay to do that, because it's a different mode of storytelling. And I do think that expectation of what, that when Kramer comes through the door, he's always going to do that thing. Like it becomes something that is expected, and that's okay to have that happen. And I think that's one of the differences between television, even in a streaming cinematic form that it is now, and cinema going movies. So I think that just be aware of it, and then lean into it. It's fun to play with that too.
Yeah. Well, and something that I don't think anyone really talks about, because we're well past the whole like you're either a DP for movies or you're a DP for television. Now it's completely cross-contaminated, cross-mogenated, I guess. But the job security's got to be nice.
Yeah,
you're on a project for longer than
it is and it isn't. It can be hard slog. Some of those longest shows that it's 10 months, and you feel like, on some of those shows, you're there you're there. I mean, the directors are coming every 3 weeks. The ADs are switching out every 3 weeks. You're, aside from number one on the call sheet, maybe you're the one that's there every day, depending on the show, but it can be a lot. And it's hard, like when you're being asked to return to a show and to do a second season, that's one of the questions is like, can I go back for 10 months and give it my all into something I've already kind of done? Is it worth the investment of a year of my life by the time you sort of, factor in having some time off and, in between shows? Like, it's a year, that's what you're talking about, investing in something. And if you've already done a season, it's like, I'm like, what am I going to get? Am I going to get frustrated? Am I going to be able to find enough to get out of this? So, those are really pertinent kind of questions, I think, too.
Yeah. And so you were saying that Lakewood was a lower budget film?
Yeah, so they probably won't like me talking about it, but I mean, like, it's a low budget film, and you do have Philip Noyce directing it. You've got Naomi Watts acting in it. So on the surface, it would seem like a kind of a big movie, but it's truly an indie movie, in terms of the way it was financed. And at the time that we made it, it was also the height of COVID. It was, I think, I'm trying to remember when we shot, it was like July, August. I mean, they literally just figured out the whole COVID protocols, and it seemed like a perfect script because the premise is about a woman who essentially is jogging in a forest. She starts off the day leaving her son, and you think he's as a brooding teenager, and you find out it's the anniversary of the father or her husband's death and passing, and you're not really sure of the circumstances, but maybe that's why the son's angry. She's on the phone a lot, and then eventually there's like a school shooting that happens. She gets an Amber Alert, but it's all fine because the son's at home, except she finds out that the son isn't at home and that his car's at the school. Maybe he's involved, and then she's trying to. It's kind of a thriller, she's trying to work out where she should be. But the interesting thing is, it's actually written by the same writer of the film Berry, Chris Spaulding, who had that film that where you had a character who was in a coffin, wakes up in a coffin, and he's got a lighter and a phone, and the whole movie's inside a coffin. It's similar kind of DNA you can see here, because you've got a woman who's running in a forest alone for most of the movie, and she's on the phone. You hear the other side of the calls, but you never leave her in that moment. So we had more or less one actor each day. We're in a forest. We shot it in northern Ontario, which I think when we were there, they'd had 6 cases of COVID total. So it was a pretty good place and a good way to work, because we were outdoors and so on, with all of the masking. We all had the face shields and all of that, which we were all kind of dealing with for the first time. But so in some ways, it was a little bit of a pilot or a test run of the kind of COVID protocols. It was a low budget film. We had a very small crew, mostly daylight dependent. And actually the film had a lot of challenges, because you've got a character who's jogging, running, walking fast at the least most of the film. And she starts off on a road, then she's on a dirt road, then she's onto tracks, and then she's onto little goat trails in the woods, and then she's literally in the forest in the middle of, with no tracks, And so the film kind of plays as real time. So when you start thinking about how to shoot that, it really is challenging, because like, what are you going to use to be able to keep up with her when some of the takes are 15 minutes long and she's going to run a few miles?
Oh, wow.
What are you going to use that can keep up with her, that isn't going to make sound? So you can record her acting and doing all that sound, because you're not going to be able to cut away to what the other. So it starts becoming a real challenge, and especially in the environment, it was really kind of interesting from that. So it was sort of deceptively complicated, and also ambitious, really, considering it's a low budget indie movie, that we were trying to do. We actually shot it in a very short amount of time. It was shot in 13 work days, and remember,
oh wow,
with Canada, we went there, we had to quarantine for 14 days. So it actually was shot in 1 day less than the quarantine that the director and I and Naomi were in to do the movie as well. So yeah, I mean, it was a very tight schedule, and Naomi was amazing, because she was in training before this, and she ran us all into the ground. I had some grips and some electrics trying to keep up with her, holding bouncers and lights, and she would run them all off without a problem. Every now and then you'd be filming, we'd be on the back of a tracking vehicle or something, and you'd sort of see a grip dive into the bushes because they just couldn't keep up with the jogging after a while. And I think she was doing I'm trying to remember, but she got down to like almost, she could go to the Masters games and be a medal contender kind of times on her miles. So she was super fit, and she showed us all up as well. That's for sure. We were all needing physio and therapy after doing it. But yeah, it was a very very challenging film in that regard. But a lot of fun to try and come up with those kind of solutions, to be able to work that out.
Yeah, what sort of like sort of bigger budget tools or techniques were you having to augment to use on a lower budget sort of indie film?
Well, there were lots of differences in terms of drama with what we wanted. So, Philip, he loves some handheld, he loves Steadicam. We used a combination of all of those tools. I found some great local crew and like great local operators, and also we came up with some pretty unique sort of solutions. So the ARRI had just come out with the stabilized remote head at the time. I don't know if you know that. It's like ARRI's.
The Trinity?
It's like a Trinity, yeah, but they made a kind of remote head version of the Trinity that you could mount. So we came up with a way of rigging that on an electric motorcycle. And we just so happened to have a grip who was a very experienced motocross, like he'd won awards and medals and stuff for the motocross. So he was a very good off-road motorcyclist. We had this electric bike, and on the back of it, we were able to mount the ARRI SRH, which is a very inexpensive, techless head. Like, it doesn't really require the same degree of support. Like, a lot of remote heads have a full-time tech, and it was a very simple sort of head. But the great thing I love about it is it's very small and lightweight. So, when we're trying to like literally weave in and out of trees and so on, when you have a small head and a small camera package, we used we actually tested the Alexa Mini at the beginning, but honestly, the budget was so low that we realized that we could get four of the Blackmagic 12K bodies for the same price as one Alexa Mini. And because we knew that we couldn't, I mean, we're doing 10-hour days, but we knew that Naomi wasn't going to be running the whole time. So we got a few picture doubles. We actually had 3 picture doubles that we could work with. So often what we do is a take with Naomi, and then we'd let her rest, and we'd do a double that would, maybe do shots that you can recognize. I said it'd be the follows and the, details of feet and so on. And by having those multiple cameras, it meant that sometimes we could split those units off. They could go and do some drone work, or they could go and do some insert work while we were shooting with Naomi. As well. So that just gave us a lot more flexibility. And we also assumed that we probably need some stabilization. So the extra resolution helped a little bit there. And honestly, just the smaller size and being able to afford 4 of them for the kind of price of one Alexa, was a big part of it. And Philip was actually, very interested in, and honestly, I usually do this for most shows. We did a blind test. I shot some stuff with the 12K. I shot some stuff with the Alexa. We actually screened it in the local cinema in North Bay, which is where we were shooting in Northern Ontario, and had it up on the big screen with the producers and the director. And everyone actually liked that what the 12K looked like the most. That was what was actually people responded to the most. So it was pretty easy. And we also knew that with the extra resolution, we could do some punch-ins. If we could either stabilize, or maybe we could reframe. If we're not going to get a lot of takes out of Naomi because she's jogging, maybe you could kind of resize and have a kind of a longer shot turn into a more of a medium shot. I'm never much of a fan of doing that, to be honest. I've been burned by that sort of thing, but at least it was a potential option if you had to. And in the end, actually, I don't think we ended up needing to do that too much, but that was another thought that was in our head. So there was lots of reasons to choose that camera, but principally we could have 4 for the price of 1. It gave us the extra resolution we might need for some stabilizing and shot resizing. It was physically smaller than an Alexa Mini, especially for long handheld takes for me. That's what I preferred as well. But it also meant going on the head. It was a lighter weight camera on the head, and made everything just a little bit easier to kind of work with. So, there were lots of reasons. So, yeah, I mean, it worked out really well. And, I actually haven't seen the final result on the big screen, but Philip was at the premiere at TIFF at Toronto International Film Festival. He said it looked amazing. It was on a giant screen there with a big audience, and he said it went down very well.
So what was your so I assume if you were planning on stabilization and stuff, you were maybe shooting a little wider than you expected?
A little bit. I mean, in the end, actually, what happens is, of course, is it's quite hard to stabilize a shot that's moving all the time. Especially if it's forest and things like that. So you're actually not tending to be able to use it as much as you think you can once you
Mhm.
start actually being in that environment. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I don't think we really changed the framing mentality. It wasn't like we were expecting it to happen, but we thought, well, maybe it'll help us if we really up against it for a certain moment. If we had a big bump or something that goes through, which did happen, sometimes you get little potholes in the roads or bumps and jerks and things, and it sort of helps smooth those a lot of those things out. But I mean, I was actually so amazed, and the crew were really good. Like none of them had really worked with any of those Blackmagic cameras before, but they in good faith, took them on, and they worked, very well and very reliably, and we got some really, really pretty results. I'm really hopeful that they'll do a trailer soon. I think the film actually has sold now, so hopefully we'll see a trailer for it soon.
Yeah. What was your lens package there? Because even with such a high resolution sensor, it's still a Super 35 sensor, but that's a
That's
lot
right.
of detail. So were you trying to like combat that with the lens choices, or are you trying to keep it pretty clean?
It's funny. I mean, when the camera first came out, I mean, my first instinct as well was like, oh my gosh, like what kind of lens do you need to use with this? But and let me tell you about a conversation I had with Naomi's hair and makeup people, because when they heard the 12K number,
Yeah.
yeah, because like, wait, you're going to put this camera at 1 foot from her face, and she's a beautiful woman, but she's of a certain vintage, and of course, everyone wants to look the best they can for the circumstances of the show and the film, and we wanted to be able to look after her, and that was going to be a challenge as well. Because I mean, for a while, I was looking at maybe I can have like you've seen the inflatable cloud
Hmm.
head. It's like maybe I can
The air
attach
mattress.
those. Yeah, exactly. I can have an air mattress attached to the vehicle and drive along and use that to protect her. But it's like that's pretty bad when you get into a forest with trees, and So I was you're kind of going through all these different scenarios. But anyway, the funny thing is that when you have that kind of resolution, and actually the opposite happens. It's almost like the structure or the pixels disappear, and it becomes in a way more flattering, especially because I think because they're quite small and there's so many of them. It's sort of it's interesting. Like I've never seen a lens with resolution, because it doesn't really work that way. Yes, you can use vintage lenses, but what I found is it's not that they soften things. All that happens with the 12K camera, if you put vintage lenses on there, is you can sort of see the faults more obviously. It becomes more transparent. The camera sort of sees more detail, so therefore it tends to see more of the aberrations that disappear maybe on a lower resolution format. So I personally think it does look better with a better performing lens, a more modern lens. I mean, I'm a big fan of using vintage optics. I love it, but I think for this particular camera, it performs its best with modern lenses. So we end up using Zeiss Supremes. And funny, I just recently, for the show I'm doing now, I just did a test where I compared Zeiss Supremes and the newer Panavision Panaspeeds, which are their kind of large format lenses that are quite new. They're post Primo 70s. They've just sort of been shipping those recently, and they're both very different lenses, very pretty lenses in their own way. But I noticed with the Zeiss Supremes, they do fall off very quickly. And I realized that when I was first shooting with the 12K and the Supremes, that I thought it was the sensor, because it sort of has this almost a large format look, is how I would describe it. But I actually think that's more to do with the lenses. Now that I've compared them with the Panaspeeds, even at the same focal length, same aperture, I would have thought they would kind of be the same in terms of how they fall off. But actually, the Supremes are beautiful in the way they fall off, and they fall off quite quickly. And I feel like that lends a bit of a large format look. So I feel like the Supremes are a very good match for the 12K. I've shot them a few times, and they work really well. So yeah, so we principally shot with the 12K camera with the Zeiss Supremes. There's a few shots in there where we had an Optimo 24 to 290 as well for some very long lens shots as well, which worked out. But yeah, probably 80% of the film is Zeiss Supremes.
I 100% agree with you. I have the large format camera, and I primarily will shoot Nikkor primes on it because I have a Nikon F2. So I was like, oh, here we
Yeah.
go, easy enough. And yeah, same thing. Really nice, like a Sigma 35 with really sharp, pretty lenses. Pop it down to a 1.8, and it looks great. But the Nicor's just that fall off is a lot prettier and does tend to, I think you're 100% right. There are certain lenses that lend itself to that look that I think people ascribe to large format, even though anyone who's read or watched Steve Yedlin's diatribes on the subject should know that is a fallacy. It is in the
Yeah.
lensing.
Yeah, it's interesting. I just shot the second season of the morning show, and we had an inherited choice there of the DXL2, which is kind of really. I've tested large format. I really like the idea of it, but every time I've tested it, I haven't really seen enough of a visual difference for it to be worthwhile for me. Not that I think it's faddish or anything. I wouldn't say that, but it's never been a thing I wanted to, really reach out and do. So it's interesting. At the moment, I'm starting a new series with Renee Zellweger, a limited crime series here in New Orleans. And I'm very interested in large format for this, only because we're going to be in smaller locations. We're going to be in really tight spaces. And I do think one of the few times that you're going to see those kind of differences with some of those wider focal lengths, if you're trying to get separation and so on, it's the only time I think that large format maybe starts to make sense. So, I'm like, okay, I'll give it a try now. So this will be my first time choosing to shoot large format, but I've kind of resisted. I mean, I think Super 35 is a great mix for most situations of kind of giving you nice focus, separation, and depth of field, but you also have the option of having more in focus. And actually, I prefer the lenses. Most of the time, Super 35 lenses are much smaller. There's a lot more variety and choice. Once you go to large format, it actually forces you to go to these big, giant, heavy, expensive, complicated lenses as well. So that hasn't been fun either. I mean, zooms are still really, really lacking, in large format, good cinema zooms as well. Not that I shoot much, and I tend to be primes, but still, it's one of those kind of main problems. And you get all these kind of expanded or converted zooms, but now they're like 5.8, zooms. It's just they're super slow and big, and yeah, I haven't really been that enthusiastic until now. I'm gonna give it a try. Check back in with me in 6 months.
Yeah, well, the having your lenses narrowed down so much is something I've noticed is a problem. Like clients going like, "Oh, we want to shoot full frame." I'm like, "Great, got that." And they're like, "And we want to shoot cooks." And I'm like, "No, you don't. That's that's going to be more than the camera."
Yeah. And also they're water mounts. There's giant lenses on the front, like they're huge,
Yeah, but the one thing I will say that the large format has been nice is the few times I've been able to play around with anamorphics. That extra height that you get on the sensor really lends you a lot more detail, and it really pulls out the character of those lenses. And it's a very pretty image in that regard.
Yeah.
That hour fucking flew by. We gotta wrap it up, but I would love to have you back on maybe in 6 months when you're maybe in the middle of that or something. But yeah, but I like to end every interview with same two questions. First one being, do you recall maybe a piece of advice that you were given that has stuck with you maybe throughout your career? Maybe it was recent, but that you think would help others? And also, can you recommend a movie that you think people should check out besides obviously yours?
I would say, I'm trying to remember the right way to phrase this, but it goes to what we were saying before about that idea of having a manifesto, making rules. Don't be afraid to make mistakes and try things out and test things out, and make your own path and make your own choices. Back your own instincts. Test those things out and try them out. It's you don't have to. It's good to be informed about what others are doing and how other techniques are, but there's 10 different ways to get to the end result. So make your own and find your own. I think that's what's interesting about what we do as a process and as a creative kind of process. And sorry, what was your last one? Oh, a film. Golly, you're putting me on the spot. What have I seen recently that I really enjoyed? It's funny looking at whenever you start a new project, you start going through old films to look at what might be relevant, just doing kind of visual research. And I rewatched I, Tonya just recently.
Oh.
And it's such a good movie. It's not that old, but it's such a well put together and such a good looking movie for a film that is, veering into kind of naturalism and documentary mentalities in terms of the way it's shot, and yet it has such a great cinematic and very well crafted look. So I really appreciated that just recently. It's a big influence on what I'm about to start now.
Well, like I said, this was a lot of fun. I would love to have you back on next time you're free. We have each other's email now, so if you have something new to say, please hit me up and we'll get it done.
Kenny, feel free to check back in, and it's been very enjoyable. Thank you very much.
Yeah, right on. Frame and Reference is an Owlbot production. It's produced and edited by me, Kenny McMillan, and distributed by ProVideo Coalition. Our theme song is written and performed by Mark Pelly, and the F&R Mattbox logo was designed by Nate Truax of Truax Branding Company. You can read or watch the podcast you've just heard by going to provideocoalition.com or youtube.com/owlbot, respectively. And as always, thanks for listening.